Well, welcome to this episode of The Family Business, where I am thrilled to introduce Lisa Ensz. Lisa is someone I've known for a long time and is an exceptional example of somehow figuring out how family and careers are intertwined like we do here on the show. Lisa, thanks so much for participating.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to have you. So can you take just the first minute and just give me and everybody a quick snapshot of, okay, this is who I am, this is where I am at the moment, because I think it kind of sets the stage, then we can get to all the fun stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I am currently the Vice President of Marketing for Corvia Medical. And Corvia Medical is a small company based outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And we're focused on transcatheter cardiovascular therapies. And in particular, we have what we call an atrial shunt. And it's targeted for the heart failure patient population. And in particular, we've been focused on heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, which is really a significant unmet need. And there haven't been a lot of therapies in that area. So we're hoping this is, the first therapeutic device to come through and really work in this patient population.
Yeah, well, for what she's not saying is Lisa has been in heart failure for how many years without aging yet?
Let's see, since 2008.
Yeah, so she's in the expert realm, and I mean she was back at Heartware when Heartware was, well, it was a little bigger than Corvia is now, right?
We were I think Heartware was about 65 people when I joined.
So
and yeah, Corvia we're under 40.
So I don't know if you can compare the two because it was so long ago. You may not have. It's like a fish story,
Right.
There's only 3 of us doing everything. But did you what are the similarities between the 2 startups?
So, I think, one of the reasons I wanted to come to Corvia was I felt like I really enjoyed those early days at Heartware. And, you kind of, like you mentioned, Matt, you do everything and you wear a lot of hats and you roll up your sleeves and all that. So Corvia is very much in that phase. I mean, very small teams and you're, working across functions and collaborating a lot. So I think it's very similar. We're also in a pretty similar spot as to when I joined Heartware. When I joined, we had, we were just about ready to get European approval. We were just starting a trial in the US. In Corvia, we have European approval. We're working on a big pivotal trial. We're in the follow-up stages of that right now. So we hope to have data in the not too distant future, but we don't have FDA approval. We're working to bring the therapy to the market and create awareness. So a lot of similarities in terms of really trying to bring a new therapy to market and really try and make it work.
It's interesting. You're saying Heartware, and I'm having this kind of parallel conversation in my head. A is that you and I built a marketing team there, and we placed some really brilliant, talented, fun.
Yes.
I mean, there are 5 or 6 people that came through there, not to mention everybody who was already there, Stuart and Jim, and just the great team you already had. And then there's the other half, which obviously is what's going on now. And so I'm not sure what you're comfortable talking about, but I'm curious how that feels, knowing that you did such a phenomenal job building this up, and unfortunately the result, though, has been less than optimal.
Yes. So yeah, as Matt is pointing out, so Heartware, we had a great run and we built a great company. I think we had a great product. We helped a lot of people. Unfortunately, recently Medtronic has made the decision to stop selling the device, and for reasons related to outcomes. And it's hard because I think back to those early days, and we often reflect back and say, not many people have that great opportunity. It was just, we worked really hard, but it was a lot of fun. And so having spent all that time and effort and energy and, commitment and to see it kind of land here is tough. I think it's tough for us that all of us who worked in the space for a long time and worked on the device for a long time, but also just for the space in general. I think you become so committed to that space and to those patients and to see, part of that therapy, not doing well, it's not good for the entire space, let alone, the one device or the one company. So it's, I think it's like, it's, you hoped it never ended that way. So I think people are, and I feel the same way. We're, proud of everything that we're accomplished and all the patients that we helped. I mean, the numerous stories and the patients you meet. And so you feel like, we did make an impact. But unfortunately, it won't have the same impact going forward.
Yeah, hey, listen, I always liken it to a party. Every now and again, the party ends. And that's just the way that
Yeah.
it goes. And sometimes it doesn't end well. Sometimes it ends with the police coming. Sometimes it ends, you know, someone's in a drunken rage. Sometimes it ends because someone's parents came home. Who knows? But, you know, sometimes it just ends. You know,
Yeah.
the one thing about you that has always been the fascinating part for me is you're from South Dakota. And I know that
Yeah.
doesn't sound like that huge of a deal to people who are probably from South Dakota, but to
Right.
me, I like to say that I've worked with people from every state and every country on the planet. And you're the only South Dakota person I've ever worked with. And so I would love to get just a quick, I don't know, minute on what's it like to grow up there, because people I'm sure have their own, you know, version in their head of what they think it is. And I'm curious what it was like for you. And then we'll kind of figure out how the heck you came east. And you went to Johns Hopkins, right?
I went to, I was at University of Richmond for college and I went to Hopkins for graduate school. Yeah.
Hopkins graduate school. Okay. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so I just would love to hear that progression if you can share just a bit of what that was like growing up there.
Yeah. So I think it's much simpler. I was just back there recently and, even my mom was saying like, see, wouldn't it be much simpler if you just moved back here? But it is, we lived, just outside, we lived outside of Sioux Falls, which is the biggest city in the state. But, we lived on a gravel road, went to a small, great elementary school, it was I would say it was very simple. I think, I learned a good work ethic. My parents worked really hard. I think, a lot of those things, but we weren't exposed. I mean, I still remember um, the first time when I went to college was like the first time I'd ever seen the ocean. Like we didn't really travel a lot. We didn't really get out. We would go visit relatives. We would do things like that. But, it wasn't like I was exposed to all these things. So, when I remember growing up and thinking, well, I really like this environment, but, if I'm going to do something different, I need to do it when I go to college. And college is the perfect time to go to a different place because a lot of people don't know anyone, right? So I'm going to go probably someplace where I don't know anyone, but I'm in the same boat as everyone else. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. And, I was thinking back to that because when I was just back in South Dakota, I was talking to one of my friends who still happens to live there. I mean, she lived in San Francisco and Chicago and DC and all over and has ended up back there. But she said too, it's, like, and we're talking about raising our kids. And she said, so she's raising her kids there. It's a little bit different because they'll go to New York and they travel around and do all these things. But, it's just drive and it's motivation. And, I think even for us as kids, even though we weren't exposed to a lot, there was something in us that felt like there's more and that we want to see more and we want to do more. And so, we pursued that and, I did and my friends did. And so, most of my close friends actually don't live there anymore, but they are still some of my closest friends.
So I want to explore that a second. So were you in some kind of program for advanced students or something?
I mean, we took AP classes and things like that, but
So
no.
but there is more to that. You're giving yourself a short shrift. My guess is you hung out with academic kids and probably kids that stayed relatively out of trouble. And so your group was probably already thinking about where can I go to school? What else can I do? So that you're surrounded by that. Were your parents encouraging you to
Yeah.
go to school outside the area?
No, my brother, I have a brother who's a year older than I am, and he went to school at South Dakota State University.
Hmm.
So he went in the state. Most kids stay, within the area. So maybe Minnesota, maybe Nebraska, maybe Iowa, but most people stay within the area. I don't know what it was or why we felt that way, but I think you're right, Matt. It's like there were a few of us and we were close friends and, one went to Tufts and one went to Boulder and one went, so my friends and I all dispersed. Um, and again, it wasn't like any of our parents were pushing us to do it. It wasn't any of that, but there was, I guess maybe it's the collective, we somehow, were self-admitted, try to be overachievers and, and wanted to do more.
So your parents were supportive. They weren't holding on to your boots while you were trying to leave the driveway?
They weren't. I mean, they were very supportive, but it was so different. I think back to it now, and everyone's going on college tours and all that. We didn't even visit. Like I went to the University of Richmond. We never visited the college before I went. We just showed up. We drove cross country. We showed up, and there we were.
How'd you choose it then? I mean, there's 500
Out of
schools.
a college book,
Seriously.
yeah, it was, like, where do I want to go? And I think my senior year, I'd gone to Virginia for a, one of those government
Uh-huh.
programs. So you go there for a week. And so I was like, oh, Virginia's kind of a cool state. First time in Virginia. And so then I was like, oh, maybe UVA, maybe University of Richmond. And I decided I want to go to a smaller school. So, I applied in Minnesota and so I kind of applied all over and, at the end decided it seemed like a unique opportunity, someplace that I might enjoy and someplace to see something different and really kind of get exposed to something new.
So were your parents like generational South Dakotans, or were they, mm,
Yeah.
or did they come from somewhere else and they kind of were transplants?
No, they lived there, grew up there, temporarily moved to Illinois, but then moved back. So no, they grew up there and had lived there basically their entire lives.
All right, so I got asked, did you have a farm or a ranch of some kind?
No, we didn't. We knew plenty of people who did, and we lived kind of again outside of the city, kind of out in the country, and around the block were horse stables. So we weren't far from that, but yeah, that wasn't my day to day, no.
So, so I guess what I'm driving at, I'm trying to find out, where did you get this bug? I mean, were your parents professional folks? Did you know any female executives?
No. I don't know, Matt. It's an interesting question. I don't know if I know the answer. So my parents both went to junior college, so they both went to 2 years of college. And they weren't, I think my parents felt strongly about us getting a good education. And, I was fortunate I always did relatively well in school. And I think, I think there were, so, one of my good friends, her boyfriend at the time had gone out east to school too. And so I think she started talking about it. And so maybe, we all just started talking about, doing something different or trying something different. And I think we all felt like, South Dakota was good. And I think it's a good, wholesome environment, but like there was so much more to see. And we just wouldn't have the opportunity if we stayed there. And if we didn't leave for college, we would probably never leave.
No, that's likely true. I mean, I went to University of Florida and I gave it a moment's thought of like moving to Atlanta or somewhere, but I came back home pretty quick. Most people who went to Florida came back to South Florida where we were from, or you went back to Orlando or
Mm-hmm.
Tampa, wherever you were from, and that's where it went. And that was because I didn't leave the state. I stayed at and great. Granted, look, in my opinion, it's the best school in the state,
Yeah.
and so it's easy for me to say that. But the truth of it is, I stayed provincial, for family reasons, financial. I was a first generation
Yeah.
college grad, and my parents were like, "Where are you going to go? You're not going anywhere too far away." And so
Mm-hmm.
that was just kind of the deal. S-
Mm-hmm.
So you get to Richmond, and then you stay on the East Coast, and so how does this start to happen with you getting into the medical technology space? Was that intentional?
So undergrad, I was biology major, and then I think I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I had a lot of friends who went to medical school. I thought about going to medical school, so I kind of thought about that, but I really wasn't ready for more school right after college. So I worked a couple years in a lab at Hopkins and did research, and quickly decided that I was not a long-term researcher. Um, and then started thinking about, well, what do I want to do? And I like healthcare. I like medicine, but do I want to be a practicing physician or do I want to do something else? And so then one of the women that was working in the lab with me at the time, she got into the public health program at Hopkins. And she was telling me, oh, this is great because it's sort of a cross section. You could do a little business, it's still healthcare. And so I started looking into that and I applied and fortunately got in. And so I went and got my master's in public health, which again, I felt like was, I'm still in the healthcare space. I'm still interested in going down this path, but not affecting, an individual one at a time. I was thinking about more of, how can you affect change on a greater scale versus than one patient at a time.
Yep.
And so, I thought that maybe this was the way to do it.
So was hardware
So
your first step into medical device?
Boston Scientific was,
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right. And how long were you at
yeah,
BSC?
just over 3 years, between 3 and 4 years.
And so how was that as far as like setting the stage for you for the rest of your career? Was it somewhat of a springboard, or was it somewhat of a limiting factor and that's why it was time to go?
So I think, I had worked at small companies before in startups, and I really liked that. I did while I was at business school, I did an internship at Boston Scientific. So, got an offer to go on, join them full time. So I ended up going there full time and really thought about it as a good training ground. So I've been in a lot of small companies and, you kind of do everything and I like that feel, but felt like there could be some benefit in also getting some training at a larger company. So from that perspective, I think it was great because I think you sort of see best practices and what good looks like and all those things. and then can take that back. So, it was then from Boston Scientific that I went back to a small company, again, kind of getting that itch to go back to a smaller company and not be, encumbered by some of the challenges and the bureaucracy in a larger organization. So, yeah, from there I went to hardware and was at hardware, all through up until through the Medtronic acquisition. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. You're one of the few people that I can think of that I've never heard anyone say anything negative about you. I've never. And I mean, I know a lot of people that know you. I know people that worked for you. I know people you worked for, and I've never heard
yes.
anyone. I mean, your reputation is one of those almost bulletproof type of reputations. And I don't know if you know how to categorize that, but why do you think that is?
People are lying to you now.
I guess there must be a lot of liars out there.
I don't know, Matt. I think, it's funny. I think back to sort of my upbringing in South Dakota, and everyone would always say, "Oh, you're so nice," right? And when I moved to the East Coast, I kind of made a joke about it, but I felt like I had to get a little less nice because people might take advantage of you and things like that. And I would say, and I still say, my family is much nicer than I am. But I think there's something, it's sort of core in the way you're brought up and how you treat people and how people want to be treated. And so I think that just got ingrained at a very young age. And so I guess I've always tried to treat people the way I would want them to treat me. And my mother-in-law says this, and I think it's true. It's like people will remember how you made them feel. And so thinking about what am I doing or how am I making this person feel? And so I think keeping that in the back of my mind has helped.
Well, I could certainly vouch for that. Everybody who worked for you would jump in front of a bus. I mean, there's something about you that made them feel empowered and important and valued, and that their career mattered to you. I know you went to bat for multiple times with them. And not that it was so hard. Jim and the team up there it's not like they were so difficult, but still you stood up for them.
I did have a lot of really good people.
Yeah, you did. I mean, that team's spectacular. But it's interesting that you would say that, because I'd be curious to know how it made you feel when, okay, here's some interesting tidbits about Lisa that you don't know. Lisa was pregnant for 6 months and no one knew. And so I'm curious about that 6-month period of how it felt knowing you're pregnant and no one else does, and not knowing when to say something, and then probably hearing some weird feedback from people about other people who are pregnant. And meanwhile, you are. So I'm really curious about that, because that was earlier part of your career. And I remember, I don't think I knew until later also.
Probably not.
No, I don't think so.
I kept it under wraps for a long time. and I fortunately carried, the baby in such a way that I could do that. It's interesting, Matt, because it's like, I think, the work environment can be very supportive and people, support, families and all that stuff. But I think sometimes there's this mentality, especially for women who have been, working and focused on your careers, and you almost feel like introducing that element somehow makes people feel differently about what you can do and what you can't do. And, whether it's a comment you hear here and there about, so-and-so has to leave early to pick up their kids, or, single people shouldn't have to take on more than, people with kids, and, because, everyone should have to travel equally, all these kind of things like that. So I think in the back of my mind, because I hadn't really gone through this, experience too, was like, I don't want people to change the perception about what they think I can or cannot do. So at the time, one of the guys that was working with us too, he was doing CrossFit. So I was doing CrossFit with them. We were doing,
really?
Yeah. And so I was able to hide it. I just started wearing like baggy, loose things. And then I told everyone, they're like, oh my gosh, like, I cannot believe you're that pregnant. And how did you hide it this long? But again, it was like, I don't want people to think that what I can or can't do changes because I'm going to have a kid or I'm pregnant or anything like that. So, and I think, when you're in that situation, you realize it, and then you realize, okay, this is probably what other people have gone through as well. And it makes you feel like, okay, I need to make sure I'm really advocating for these women and make sure that people don't have this perception that just because you have kids or things like that, that you can't do as much as someone who doesn't. So,
well, you always have a choice when you achieve something. Do you reach back and help the next person? or you don't. And there's really no right or wrong to it. There's no requirement that you have to. What you've achieved, I think, is enough. But there are some people, the first thing they do is turn around and they start pulling people with them. And one of the women that I did this podcast with, she's big on normalizing women being on boards. And so since she's on a few, she has been pulling everybody with her. I mean, she's unreal. And she's the complete opposite of other people. Like, look, I can't believe I just made it. Everybody let me breathe
Yeah.
for a second. But for her, she's like, come on. And it's just interesting. And I'm glad to hear that you speak up, because it's always tough your first time as a parent. You're scared and you don't know what's going to happen. Are people going to look at you different? Or are you going to get less opportunity? All those things that you hear about. But it's interesting for you in that for your second child, you had some challenges at your pregnancy as well. And I'm curious how that went and how you felt when people found out that you were having some challenges. And I'll let you go into detail on that.
Yeah. So I was pregnant with my second child, and I hadn't even gone in for the first visit because they want you to wait till you're 3 months. So I was just short of my, 3 months, and I found a lump in my breast, and I was like, oh boy. So, I called them and they said, okay, well, we'll get you in right away. So they were fantastic about getting me in and seeing me. And they said, yeah, let's do a biopsy. And so they did that. I said, well, it's precancerous cells. So maybe, but we need to go in and do surgery. So here I am like, oh, geez, what's going on? I'm now, they confirmed I was pregnant and the baby was healthy and all that. And I remember I was at like our biggest conference of the year, which was the International Society of Heart and Lung Transplantation. And then I got the call from the doctor. And you always remember like the moment they tell you. And she was like, you have cancer. And I'm like, oh.
I can't have that now.
So I'm sitting at this conference trying to find like a corner. And so it's sort of like, then your mind races. Like for me, it was like, okay, so then what, right? And, she said, good thing is, it's small and it's slow growing. And so, all those things were good. But we need to go back in because we didn't get it all. So I had a second surgery while I was pregnant. And then, then they enlist the whole team. So there's a radiation oncologist, there's, a medical oncologist, everyone to figure out like, what's the right treatment strategy? And for me, that was a concern, like, I still have the baby, I can't have radiation. And so, we figured it all out. I was able to have the baby was healthy. They waited, they allowed me to breastfeed for a while and postpone radiation because I didn't, because they had done the surgery previously and they felt like we could wait a little bit. So then I was, feeding the baby on one side and having radiation on the other and kind of just doing it. And but you realize, at first it's sort of like, oh my gosh, all this, how can I manage all this? But at the same time too, like you feel like you still want to move forward with your career and do all this stuff. So at the same time, I don't remember if I had told you this, not bad enough, but I was entertaining changing jobs too. And I was like, oh, there's this new VP of marketing opportunity that was presented to me and I almost took it. And, people around me were like, you have a lot going on. I think you need to focus on your health, your new baby, right? Because there's the uncertainty with it. I hadn't gone through a radiation treatment yet. I didn't know if the baby, you hope the baby's going to be healthy, but all those things. But there's still like, this, like, I want to keep moving forward and doing, pushing my career.
You can't shut off who you are. And sometimes some people that I found that are very high achievers, when something kind of confronts them, they go even harder. They don't pull off the pedal. They slam it down to the floor. And it takes somebody like a family member or a friend or a spouse to say, I need you to pump. My wife wanted to go to California when she was due in like 5 or 6 weeks. And I said, you're out of your mind. And luckily the doctor told her for me. I didn't have to tell him to say something. I just stood behind her like going, please say the right thing. And he goes, Amy, there is no way on God's green earth I'm going to sign off on you going anywhere. And it turns out she had the baby 5 weeks early. She would have had the baby in California. Yeah, so I always hold that in my pocket every time she tells me she's right. I'm like, oh, you are? Well, I remember a time when you weren't so right. And so, yeah, she reminds me a lot of you. You guys are pretty similar. Yeah, so.
But Matt, I think you're right because I remember feeling like, well, I don't want anyone to tell me that I shouldn't be able to do this. Like, I didn't tell them at first that I was pregnant, right? And I hadn't had the cancer diagnosis yet, so I didn't tell them I was pregnant. And then I did tell him, I want you to know I'm pregnant. I don't want you to hire someone and be surprised that I'm pregnant. And then, and then the cancer diagnosis came, and I was like, I still don't want to be limited just because
Yeah.
of these things. I still feel like I can do it. But again, ultimately decided that I need to prioritize, how do you prioritize family and health and all these other things, and that those are more important than a job, and other jobs will come along, and they have. So
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can tell you from where I sit that you don't have to worry. There's gonna be plenty of opportunities for you. That's not the only bus in town.
yeah.
So don't sweat that. Now, because you mentioned something to me that triggered, I wanted to make sure I asked you before we wrapped up, which we still got a few more minutes, but you had said that you really didn't have much of a role model growing up as far as female executives and big aspirations and lofty dreams other than your friends. So I'm curious, now that you have Lily, she's 6.
6.
Okay. So do you do anything overtly or covertly for her to make sure that she sees there's a whole world out there for her to do whatever she wants, and women aren't limited by anything, and you want to go to school overseas, great, or whatever it is, it's fine? Or has it been a struggle saying, look, my kids have grown up in a much more privileged home and a much more, let's call it worldly city, and exposed to things that you certainly weren't exposed to in Sioux Falls. So I'm curious how you're juggling all of that.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, like you say, Matt. I mean, I think so. We've taken the approach of wanting to expose them to as much as possible. I mean, I think we got a passport for Lillian when she was 3 months old. Again, related to a work trip, I wanted to bring her along, and we went. But so she's been to 4 or 5 countries, and so she's been exposed and seen things. She knows I work. I used to travel a lot for work. I haven't obviously traveled as much now, but she knows that both mommy and daddy work. And so and her grandmother is very much, is an entrepreneur, and so is very much like, women are strong and women can do anything. And so I think she sees a lot of, positive role models around, and realizes that, girls can do anything, girls can do as much as boys can do, and more. So I think she has a lot of positive role models like that. I think the challenge, as you point out, is, how do you keep them grounded, and because we are more exposed and we can take her places and do all these things, how do you keep them grounded in sort of what reality is, and what maybe other people are experiencing? So we try to do those things too, and for example, our kids gotten, it's sort of this habit of, we go to the store and be like, I want this, I want this. And it's like, you can't get something every time we go to the store. Like, this is not like we go to the store, we get a toy. And so, then we started saying, okay, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to put a box in the corner, and you guys start collecting all the toys you're going to give away, because we're going to give away toys if we're going to get more toys. And, just to get them to start to think about, we don't just get everything and get to do everything. And it's not like that for everyone.
Yeah, we went through the same thing. My wife and I grew up hard, and our kids are having a different life. We're living in a town that's a bit of a bubble, and I don't know if your kids go to school in that kind of bubble, but mine do, and it's been interesting to explain to them. So what I started doing was showing them what everything costs. Every time we go out to dinner, I show them the bill. Every time we buy whatever it is. And my son and my daughter too, to her credit, she's just a little older and a little more mature. But for my son, he is very cognizant of when the price of something starts to rise. Like if he wants to get a couple pairs of shorts and a couple t-shirts because he's growing. I'm like, bud, you're outgrowing your clothes. This is not you being, as he says, fancy. I said, you need clothing. Your shirts have holes in them, and they don't fit. And so he was like, fine. But when we went to Dick's Sporting Goods, and the price started to go up because he was ringing up 4 things, 5 things, 6 things. And I'm like, bud, you need clothing. But he was getting really uncomfortable. I'm like, man, I must have done something right. The kid is not feeling entitled. He was getting concerned that it was too much. And I'm like, finally, I did something correct, I think, here.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, yeah, so
she is learning, like, because she did want to do a lemonade stand because she wanted to save money. So she, we paid for the the lemonade and all that.
Startup cost, Lisa.
Yeah. So we paid for the startup cost. She, she went to the park, had the lemonade stand, she'd kind of run off and play, I think, and then a customer would come and she'd run over and do it. The nanny took her out and they did it. But then, she had her money, and we went to the store and she wanted to buy something with her money. And I'm like, well, I'll just give you $10 and you can pay me back. Right. and she really wanted to use her money.
Yeah.
So I think, to your point, they start to get it, and they start to get, okay, I understand that things cost, but I want to use my own then because I earned it and I made it. And so, again, I like you say, I don't know that you can start too early and start to, give them some
Well,
appreciation.
that's funny because you don't want to get too serious with them and you start having adult conversations when they're not ready for it. By the same token, I think it's important because they're exposed to some families that have a significant amount of money and the kids don't know how to process. Well, everyone I'm friends with has X. I'm like, I know, but that's a lot for an 8-year-old to have and that kind of situation. Now, does she say things that you say? Does she copy you?
She does. I mean, we have, like those little calculators. She'll carry that around. And there's a phone. So my husband's old iPhone, and so she'll carry that around, and she'll pretend like she's talking, and then she'll be on her little calculator, which she's calling her computer. I just need to send one more email, and she'll like. I'm like, they clearly parrot what they're hearing, which is it creates a lot of self awareness for us. Like, what are we saying, and what's coming out of their mouths.
So Harry is 3?
Mary's 3.
Yeah, and is he more like his dad or more like you?
I don't know. He like, people said the threes are worse than the twos, and with him, that's the case. Like he was the sweetest little baby, and he's still super sweet, and he'll say really cute things, but he's got a lot of energy and he's pretty wild. So
Yeah, I mean that comes with the territory. They're always jumping off of something and or
yes,
jumping on the dog or doing something that you just like. How many times do I have to tell you you can't
yes,
do that?
yes.
Yeah. Do you have that whole mama syndrome? Like my wife is just attached to my son. That is just her person. And it seems like most of the moms I know, especially the high powered ones, like their son is their baby bear and don't even look funny at my kid because it's not going to end well for you. Are you a mama
Yeah,
bear?
yeah. I'm probably that way about both kids, but I would say he's much more attached to me
Yeah.
than he is to my husband. So he's always wants me. I'm first choice. I imagine it's not always going to be that way, but I'm first choice for now. So
It was that way for me. And
good
then,
and bad. I don't know.
yeah, well, it's definitely good or bad. It was that way for me until I started coaching him in every sport. And then I became his guy. And now we do everything together. My wife still cuddles with him and does whatever. He's 14, so he's all like elbows and knees, so it's kind of hard to cuddle the kid. It's like cuddling a broom, but it has changed a bit. And sometimes he'll tell me stuff like about girls and stuff, and he's going to high school next year, and I'm like, you're telling me? No one tells me anything. I'll listen, because it's so funny when I get included in something. Yeah, it's a fun ride, and I'm really glad you got one of each. Look, whatever you get,
Yes,
as long as they're healthy, it's fun. But when you get one of each, it becomes almost scientific in the
yes.
experimentation of raising one gender of each and one kid, and you'll find that you'll see that it's interesting how Lily becomes more maternal, or he becomes very brotherly toward her and protective of her, like all these things that you don't see as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she definitely plays that role,
Yeah.
and he plays the annoying little brother, and but I, I know they both care for each other because they'll be somewhere, and somebody will get a balloon, and they'll say, I need to get one for my my brother or sister. So at the end of the day, they love each other, but there's definitely moments.
Awesome. Well, look, this is every bit as good as I thought it was going to be. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed getting to know you in a way that I didn't, with all these years, I still didn't know that much about you. We didn't even cover all our ground, but, obviously, how long can you stand talking to me? Thanks so much for joining us.